A juror about to be dismissed? A visit from Kanye West and guns, baby oil, and king nights. What a day it was in the Sean Diddy Combs criminal trial. We're going to break it all down for you right now. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey everybody, this is another Law&Crime legal alert. So recent allegations against the multi-billion-dollar video game industry claim that video games are engineered for addiction. The claims include trying to make sense of the hold that video games seem to have over people, where they just can't put the controller down. Every win triggers a hit of dopamine, and that creates a cycle of compulsion that disrupts daily life and it harms mental health. But our legal sponsors, they are taking on the industry that has at many times allegedly put profit over safety, and they are working to potentially get compensation for all of those impacted. So if you or a loved one have suffered physical or mental health issues due to video games, then visit vgclaims.com/sidebar to answer less than 10 questions and check your eligibility to file a claim. Yeah, like I said, a lot happened today in Sean Combs' racketeering, sex trafficking, prostitution trial. So much so, we don't even need an introduction. Let me just bring on right now Elizabeth Millner, Law&Crime's in-court reporter who was there for every minute of the action, including what happened when the jury wasn't present, because there was a lot there too. So first of all, Elizabeth, good to see you. Big development today. This juror, we knew there was an issue with a juror, and the judge, if I'm understanding what happened today, the judge basically accused the juror of making misrepresentations to the court to what? Stay on the jury? And the judge had wanted to dismiss this juror, but then there was some pushback from the defense, and now my understanding is there's not a resolution. He might wait till after the weekend to make a decision on this juror. What is going on here?
Yeah, it seemed like this was kind of a big focus of today outside of Kanye West trying to attend court today. But as far as today goes, a lot of people wanted to know what was going to happen to juror number 6. Now, a lot of the time, especially earlier this week, they were very tight-lipped as far as just what the details were surrounding what the issue was. But what we've learned from the judge later this afternoon is it was a lot of kind of inconsistent statements that this juror was making all the way going back to voir dire. And so what the judge said, that he looked back at the transcript, because there were conversations with this particular juror that happened twice already at this point at the robing room. So unfortunately, it was something that we don't see in the transcripts, nor are we listening to it happen when it's happening inside the court, because it's happening behind closed doors pretty much. But as far as the judge is concerned, the issue came up after that offhand conversation that this juror had with jury staff, just talking about kind of making that travel from New Jersey to New York. And that's a big problem, right? Because in New Jersey, that's not where the jury pool was taken from. They were taken from counties here in New York City, Westchester County, Bronx County, and even here in Manhattan too. And so this juror told the staffer that he recently moved to New Jersey with his girlfriend and said something along the lines of, "It may not be permanent. I've been staying there the last couple of weeks." And so the juror was asked if he stayed at his home. Was it either in New Jersey or was it in the Bronx? So at one point he's saying he's spending 4 or 5 nights here in New York City at his apartment here. But on the other hand, he's saying he's in New Jersey where his girlfriend or fiance is there, but also with their baby daughter. And so in voir dire, this particular juror said that he lives in the Bronx with his fiance and daughter, but in the robing room, he said that he lived in New Jersey. And so the judge was like, there are several inconsistencies. The issue here is the juror was unable to follow instructions, and those were the simple instructions that were given to these juries during their questionnaire portion, as far as where do they live and who do they live with. And so the judge was saying there were serious issues with this juror's candor, and that he didn't believe that they needed to do any further inquiry as far as questioning this juror once again. So that would make it, I think, questioning him, 3 or 4 times probably at this point, and that the court is concerned about the changing of the answers, the inconsistencies, and that the omissions and inconsistencies kind of played a role into the judge's decision, which initially he was going to dismiss this juror. I think he was pretty concerned that if this juror were to go and deliberate, that this could cause more issues later on in the process. But then the defense stands up and they're like, you know what, Judge, these answers don't really affect this particular juror's ability to serve on this particular jury. He says this is kind of a thing for a lot of people who live in this area, that they have significant others who live in New Jersey, or it's vice versa, where people who live in New Jersey have significant others in New York. and that this particular juror should be given the opportunity to explain himself again. And so the defense was really kind of honing in on the idea that these jurors have been very attentive throughout this entire process of the trial so far. Like I always mentioned, during our hits, Jesse, that a lot of these jurors are paying attention, they're taking notes, like in both parties, as well as the judge, kind of commends the jurors for being so attentive while inside the court. And so the defense was really kind of adding to that and said, I'm worried that the court equals or equates inconsistencies with lies. And so the defense said, we've taken strides to get this diverse jury, and we will go backwards kind of as far as just, less diversity if this particular juror was dismissed, because one of their arguments previously is that the government just wanted to dismiss this juror because this particular juror is black. However, the government took offense to that, and they said that no additional inquiry is necessary. Mr. Donaldson suggesting that this is motivated by race, but it's really just about preserving the record. And the judge said, okay, well, if he indicated that he splits his time in New Jersey and the Bronx during voir dire, this would be one completely different story. But he said during the voir dire process, during jury selection, that he lived in the Bronx. So he said it's not just an issue of the juror wanting to just be on the jury, but he also said that his bills go to New York, and it seemed like the juror was particularly just wanting to stay on this particular case. And so the judge was like, we don't need him to reconcile these inconsistencies. There shouldn't have been inconsistencies in the first place. And the defense is like, well, we compromise the integrity of the process if we make this jury less diverse. And they say that this issue everyone knew about, and this was Brian Steele at this point making this argument. But then both sides were kind of like, no, we did not know about this. This was just an issue that came up this week. Then what was interesting, Jesse, was there was this moment where we thought that we would get an answer to what was happening. The judge dismissed a lot of us from the courtroom. We were outside of that courtroom for about 20 to 25 minutes. We thought when we were going to come back, we'd learn what would happen. And unfortunately, we do not know the full scope of what's going to be happening next.
Yeah, that's interesting. You don't always see that, where the judge is pretty firm in a decision and basically makes the argument that the juror was saying whatever they needed to say to stay on the jury, and yet kind of persuaded, it seems, a little bit by the defense's arguments. So now going to wait till next week to find out if this juror is going to be dismissed. That's why we have alternates. You would think that would be the biggest part of today. It wasn't. Kanye West shows up. Now, he is a friend. He is a supporter of Sean Combs, and he shows up in court today, or to court today, in dramatic fashion, but he doesn't quite get into the courtroom, does he?
No, he doesn't. Unfortunately, Kanye West, or Ye as he's being called now, he did not get his way. So he was not inside the main courtroom, nor did I see him inside the main courtroom at any point today. So it's unclear, and hopefully they do not know this, but I don't believe the jury has any kind of notice that Kanye West was trying to get into the courtroom. He was able to get in the courthouse. From what I understand, is he was sent to the media overflow room with Christian Combs, which is Diddy's son, as well as Charlucci, who's been at a lot of days of Diddy's trial, as well as even the pre-trial stuff, and he's a good close friend of Diddy as well. But as far as Kanye West being inside the main courtroom, that didn't happen. And from what I understand, he was only in the overflow room for about 20 minutes before kind of making his grand exit and leaving. But I'm sure he'll try to get back to the courthouse, possibly later on in this trial. And
I understand he was sitting next to Sean Combs' son, so yeah, he was there for a little bit and then left. Would have been interesting if he was actually in the main courtroom. Okay, now I want to get into the substance of what happened today. And by the way, even before the government's first witness of the day was called, there was something major that happened. There was a series of text messages that were introduced into evidence, right? One was from Sean Combs to Kristina Khorram, KK, his former chief of staff. And another one was from Cassie to Combs' former security guard, D-Rock. These were introduced into evidence, right? Why were these so significant? What were these messages?
Yeah, so this was at a point where the jury was present, so they were able to see and hear about these text messages. And finally, the exhibit screen is back on for the gallery after Jane has completed her testimony. So we were finally able to see these exhibits as well. And so the first one was data that was collected from Kristina Khorram's cell phone. And so they showed messages from Kristina Khorram to Diddy on November 21st of 2023, where Diddy, and he had the name Puff Music in this particular message, said, make sure Robin isn't doing anything dumb and pay paying her rent on time. Now, if you think about that in context, November of 2023 was around the time that Diddy was already paying for Jane's rent at this point. And so I think these messages had to do with Jane and just the fact that Diddy was paying for her rent around this time.
So if I remember correctly, she had texted basically the rent was paid. And the reason that's so significant, right, is because the prosecution says, oh, him paying her rent, you know, him telling her she can't do OnlyFans. It's a way for him to control her financial well-being, finances, wealth. It's a way to exert coercion for sex trafficking purposes, right? That's what the prosecution has been trying to say, that force, fraud, coercion has been used to induce her into these sex acts with male performers, commercial sex workers, that's sex trafficking. It happened in all these different locations. So the more they can show, oh, he's paying for her rent, you know, that's significant. Now, the defense's point of view, I guess, would be she knew what she was getting into. She was getting the benefit of this relationship. He was paying for things for her. So it's interesting to hear that. And obviously for Kristina Khorram, the more the prosecution can say assistants were a part of this, that's how you get to racketeering conspiracy. That's how you get to him using his inner circle, his staff, his assistants to facilitate crimes, to facilitate prostitution, to facilitate sex trafficking. It's all important for racketeering. Okay, sorry to interrupt. There was another message that came in, right? What was that about?
Yeah, so this message, this was actually kind of an interesting point. So it was from a cell phone that was seized from Damian Butler. And who is Damian Butler? He is none other than D-Rock himself, one of Diddy's longtime security guards, but also a close personal friend of Diddy, too. And so it was interesting because we saw kind of the stipulations between both of the parties where this particular cell phone from Damian Butler was seized on September 22nd of 2024 at Newark Airport. However, these messages date back to January of 2017 when Diddy was still in a relationship with Cassie at this point. And so Cassie sent a text message to D-Rock that's saying, my bathroom door is broken down. He has my keys. I'm leaving because I don't feel safe. I'm not effing with anyone else. I wasn't going to anyone's house. I was going home. Then we see D-Rock had messaged back, okay, someone was following you home. I don't think that's a good idea to leave your home. Then Cassie responds, he thinks I'm going somewhere else. The key has a blue fuzzy tail. Take it. And D-Rock said, you know I can't take your keys from him. He also said a couple more things too, but I think what the prosecution was trying to introduce is just, again, another point where Diddy staffers were kind of doing things on his behalf. In this instance, where Cassie is kind of relaying that she wants the keys to her home back, and Damian Butler, aka D-Rock, doesn't want to take them away from his boss at this point, which we know to be Sean Combs, aka Diddy.
And again, goes to her alleged force, fraud, coercion. Remember, she makes up one of the individual sex trafficking counts. So look at the environment she's in. Look at her, you know, big question is, could she have walked away? Could she have escaped? Could she have fought back? Look at the environment she's in. I think this is an important message ultimately for the jury to consider. Now, we get into the testimony of a special agent from Homeland Security who, my understanding, was part of the raid at Combs' LA mansion last year. Remember, his properties in LA and Miami were raided by federal agents. And they found a lot at this house, right? Elizabeth, what did they find?
And honestly, Jesse, I'm not going to lie, I love a good evidence day. But then there were points during this where I was kind of like, okay, well, what are we really getting to? What is kind of the point? But I'll kind of explain it. So yes, Andre Lamont was one of the Homeland Security, and he works for Homeland Security Investigations, and he is a special agent. So he's assigned to the Human Trafficking Group, and specifically in the Los Angeles office. So on March 25th of 2024, what did he do? Well, he was none other than at Diddy's LA mansion, that one in Mapleton that a lot of the jury has been hearing about at nauseum at this point. And so what was interesting is that they said, Andre Lamont had testified that Homeland Security Investigations here in New York asked for assistance for this search in LA. And so Andre Lamont's role was kind of seizing and processing the evidence for the office here in New York. And so right off the bat, we're seeing a number of exhibit photos. So we see Diddy's home in Los Angeles. We see kind of a point from the front of the home as well as a point from the back of the home. And it's a beautiful, gorgeous property, but it's also humongous because there's 3 different buildings alone just on this property. You have the main home, you have the sauna, which, I mean, hello, he's rich. Of course he would have a sauna-like building. And then he has a gym and a studio because obviously he is, this mega hit maker, and he has a studio and a gym, and he has a lot of money too. So of course he would have 3 buildings and they would all just be humongous. And so we got to see more of just some of the items that were found specifically in the Los Angeles homes, because previously we saw what was found in the Miami home. So now we got a kind of a peek into what was found in the Los Angeles home. So at first we see an exhibit where it's like this detailed layout of the property. The basement isn't shown in this particular kind of layout. We see the first floor of the home, the security room, the garage. The second floor had the master bedroom, the closet. And so inside the master bedroom, because we saw an exhibit photo of it, it was kind of a white bed, a messy nightstands in a way, and then 2 chairs kind of in front of the bed. And so the exhibit kind of showing inside of the specific drawer in the nightstand was 6 manila envelopes with the letter K on it. Then we see kind of another stipulation. We find out what that K tested positive for, at least the powdery residue that was found inside the manila folder, and that tested positive for ketamine. But also inside that nightstand were just, other things that people have in their nightstands, like earrings, chargers, cell phones, iPads, and Vaseline too. And so then we see an exhibit photo of the closet, which was, I guess, on the opposite wall of the master bedroom, where there was a specific safe in this closet. So inside that safe, we saw Diddy's passport, we saw money, a plastic bag with this substance that kind of looked like paprika in a way, but we learned that that later tested positive for MDMA or Molly, and then we saw just kind of clothes sprawled out within this closet. Then we also saw none other than baby oil in a bag, Astroglide. We saw lingerie that was also found in the closet. And it was interesting because Andre Lamont testified that around this entire property, 600 bottles of baby oil were seized, but 900 bottles of Astroglide were seized, because inside Diddy's home, there were just kind of stacks and stacks and boxes, and all of it had Astroglide. And I think also what's notably interesting is that all of it was kind of organized in a way that was just very neat and organized, like stacked all together. All the tops were facing the same way. It was kind of that type of thing. But then one of the big things, and I think this was kind of maybe a sticking point of where the prosecution was going, was the security room and what was found inside the security room. And so inside it was firearms, because of course Diddy has a large security staff at this point, and it's a little bit different than the security staff he had kind of in the earlier years, because witnesses have testified that the security he had kind of in the later years, especially around the time that his homes were raided, were more professional, and that they did carry weapons. And so we saw exhibits of 2 chairs in the security room with firearms on these chairs. And so it was a bolt-action Ruger rifle, a Smith & Wesson rifle, which was like a semi-automatic AR-15, a Glock. We saw a Glock pistol in the rifle close up. There were 3 30-round magazines, a Glock magazine, 2 locks for the pistol holder, and then a 5.11 bag, which is a bag that Andre Lamont said that was pretty much just to hold things. And we see a drum magazine. It was 60 rounds, and then 59 rounds of bullets were found. And so then the witness, that being Special Agent Andre Lamont, showed the jury this kind of big giant rifle. And so only one of the firearms didn't have a serial number on it, and Andre Lamont testified that it might have been sanded off because it was kind of smooth to touch as far as where the serial number would originally be placed. And then finally we see an exhibit, and that was the safe in the security room. And so at the end, the direct examination ended with just, again, that photo, but that Andre Lamont testified that it appears to be a firearm safe. And then I thought, okay, maybe there's a little bit more. And then the direct ended, and then we got to cross. And so I think they were trying to really kind of point out that there was a large amount of weapons inside Diddy's home. But as the defense kind of pointed out, there might have been a reason why there were a large amount of weapons in that home, but for a specific reason, not to what the government is alleging.
So a lot of things to break down there. You would wonder, it's a lot of firepower. That is a lot of firepower. And if you go back to his indictment, under methods and means of the racketeering conspiracy, it's one of the sections. And remember, we're talking about a criminal enterprise. I'm going to read you what it says because I think it's important. Members and associates of the Combs enterprise, including Combs security personnel, at times carried firearms. On more than one occasion, Combs himself carried or brandished firearms to intimidate and threaten others, including victims and witnesses to his abuse. In or about March 2024, during searches of Combs' residences in Miami, Florida, and Los Angeles, California, law enforcement seized firearms and ammunition, including 3 AR-15s with defaced serial numbers, as well as a drum magazine. So they're basically trying to prove what they alleged in the indictment, but it goes more to this idea of him being a criminal leader, right? That's what they're trying to sell. Look at using these different instruments to facilitate a pattern of criminal conduct. And, you know, the baby oil, the things like that, those are products or alleged products of sex trafficking. So I think it's really important for the jury to understand what was ultimately at his home. Elizabeth, on cross-examination, where did they go? Because they can't argue away what was there, but didn't they provide a little bit more context about where it was found and what could be the value of it?
Well, initially, and I'll just kind of spill this to you, Jesse, and I'm pretty sure you already know about this, but before, originally the defense didn't want Andre Lamont to be testifying because he wasn't the one who had removed or moved the rifles from the security room to kind of lay them out. Somebody else did. And then there was kind of a whole argument about chain of custody, who did what, and how did these firearms get placed on the chairs when they belonged in the security room. And so that's what Mark Agnifilo really kind of spoke about during his cross-examination today. So he was asking questions like, you're aware that Mr. Combs has a security service? Andre Lamont responds, yes. They show that exhibit photo of the layout of the home, which shows the security office, and that the guns were recovered only from that specific place inside that home. And again, it's a massive property, but according to Mark Agnifilo, the guns were only in that security office. They weren't sprawled out everywhere across the home, because he was asking questions like, okay, you saw that there were bedrooms where children live, and those being Diddy's children, obviously. And then Andre Lamont is like, correct. Okay, well, there were no ammunition found in the bedrooms. Andre Lamont says, correct. Okay, well, was the security door open? Andre Lamont responds, yes. Well, was the door locked beforehand, that being the door to the security office? Andre Lamont responds, he doesn't know. Well, could you see if it had a lock? And Andre Lamont is like, well, it had a doorknob. I didn't look at the lock. And then Mark Agnifilo is like, well, you didn't take pictures of the state of the door when law enforcement arrived. And Andre Lamont responded, he doesn't know if photos were taken before that they were arrived. And Mark Agnifilo is like, well, do you know, was the safe open before law enforcement got there? Andre Lamont says, I don't know. Do you know how the safe got open? No. This was specifically a gun safe. Yes. And so we see the gun safe exhibit again. And then this photo doesn't specify how this safe was open, whether it was manipulated to be open, or I guess maybe whether it just opened on its own. And so Mark Agnifilo is like, okay, well, what do you do as a lead agent on a search? And so Andre Lamont responds, he looks for items to be seized. He advises the search teams. He advises HSI New York. Mark Agnifilo is like, okay, well, as lead, wouldn't you want to know where the weapons were found? Because that was kind of a big thing. And Andre Lamont is kind of like, yes and no, as far as just their standard operating procedure, because for the most part, another team comes in, and what they do is kind of secure the location, get all the people out of the home. Because if you guys have been following this case from when the rapes happened, and then, you know, when the surveillance video was released a little bit after, guns were drawn, people were kind of pulled out of the home with weapons, they were handcuffed. There were photos circulating of Diddy's sons being handcuffed and being placed on the grass outside of the property around this time frame. And so I think the defense was really trying to point out, okay, well, what happened once this home was cleared, and how was everything placed in what manner, and that type of thing. And so Andre Lamont was asked, have you seen a photo of the safe before? And he says no. And then he's asked, did you have a meeting on how to conduct a search? Is this protocol photographing items before it's moved to another place? Andre Lamont says yes. But then Andre Lamont says the SRT, which is the team that clears the home, they don't take photos of the items. Their job is solely just to clear the home, make sure it's safe, those types of things. And so Mark Agnifilo is like, okay, well, you have no idea where the guns were. Were they scattered in the security room, or were they in the safe? And then as far as Homeland Security investigations, they don't necessarily know. And then kind of towards the end of the cross-examination, he is asked, how many times have you found baby oil in Astroglide in your 60 searches? Because if he's under the human trafficking group, and then there's baby oil in Astroglide, he, being Andre Lamont, responded, okay, well, just once. And then towards the end of the cross-examination, I did see Diddy kind of give Mark Agnifilo a little thumbs up, kind of signaling that he was good on the questions that were asked. And I think there were kind of enough holes possibly poked during the cross-examination, and then that's kind of where they ended there.
Well, was he so happy that he was nodding to the jury? Because didn't that come up today too? Didn't the prosecutor say, hey, my staff is seeing him nodding during that cross-examination? And we know last week the judge said, or was it the week before, the judge said, don't do that. Don't do that. I will, if I see you making any kind of motion towards the jury, I will give this jury a limiting instruction that you will not like, or I will kick Sean Combs out of the courtroom. Didn't that happen today too, or that was alleged?
Oh, no, that definitely happened today. But as far as kind of what happened, I think it was a little different from the really kind of harsh language that the judge was using beforehand. So this was brought up after Andre Lamond was off the stand, after the jury was dismissed for a little bit for a logistical issue. So the government stood up and they were like, okay, we were informed, and AUSA Maureen Comey is making this argument. She says that one of her colleagues had messaged her saying that she saw during the cross-examination of both Andre Lamond and Jane during her testimony too, that Mr. Combs was nodding during the cross-examination. And then Brian Steele, who sits normally to Diddy's left, stands up and is like, you know what, Judge, Mr. Combs has been nothing but professional. And, you know, I will say there were times where I did kind of see him nodding along. So the AUSA and the prosecution's office wasn't wrong here. But then the judge was kind of like, well, it's impossible to police every single reaction that the defendant is having because he is human, because, you know, he can't just sit there and watch his demeanor and mannerisms at every single point during the trial. There's a lot of stuff going to be happening. So he didn't give such a harsh instruction like he did the other week. But I think if it becomes kind of more of an issue, then the judge will really kind of have to take this matter just a little bit more seriously. So that witness leaves the stand, and then we get to the testimony of somebody we were waiting for, Jonathan Perez, Sean Combs, I would say former assistant. He was basically his assistant, I learned, right up until the point Sean Combs was arrested. This is a gentleman who was granted immunity to testify. What did we learn about how he started and what his job duties were? Yeah, so how he started at the end of 2021 working for Diddy. So originally it was for Combs Enterprises. Now the company is called Combs Global, and he worked as an assistant. And I think what was an interesting point is the other witnesses have testified they call Sean Combs Puff or Diddy or something like that, PD. But for Jonathan Perez, he calls him Mr. Combs or Mr. C, making it just a little bit formal. But as far as just in his entire employment with Sean Combs, it was from December of 2021 up until his arrest around the time frame of September of 2024. He was explaining that Kristina Khorram was actually the one to reach out to Jonathan because he had interviewed for this particular position years prior, but then he ended up coming back for the same role after KK had reached out to him. So he did a 1-week trial period and then he took on the job. And so his responsibilities were kind of similar to other assistants' responsibilities. He was to do research. He had to bring Sean Combs wherever he needed to be. He worked close with the house manager. He worked at both homes, both in Los Angeles and Miami. And then he kind of led us into his salary, and he made a lot of money as an assistant to Diddy. He made $85,000 at the beginning of his employment, and then towards the end, he made six figures. He made $100,000 towards the end. And so, as far as just what we learned and kind of the initial points of his testimony is that he also kind of helped set up what he calls king nights. So as far as everyone is concerned, king nights, hotel nights, nights of debauchery or debauchery nights, freak-offs, they're all one and the same. They just go by just different names. But according to Jonathan, he knew them as king nights. And so he says that he was aware of king nights. He knew that it was Mr. Combs going to a hotel for private time with a female. He knew Jane was involved in king nights with Diddy. Kristina Khorram would tell Jonathan about the king nights. He would pack materials for 12 to 24 hours for Diddy to be away either at a hotel or over at another guest home, as he called it. And the guests were normally the women Diddy was kind of having this alone time with during these nights. But he would also provide materials such as liquor and music, lights, food, clothes, condoms, lubricants, honey, and then the lights too, such as the lights that were used to record, and they were specific red lights. And so the king nights for the most part took place in a hotel around the time that Jonathan was kind of helping setting them up. And then sometimes, as far as even who would book these hotels, because we heard a lot of testimony that either Jane would book hotels, but also he kind of let us into the travel agent would book hotels too, and that travel agent being Jessica Ruiz. And so again, they took place at hotels or at guest homes. Jonathan would set up king nights, according to him, around 5 different times during his employment. And he said that was because he normally worked during the day, and that's why he didn't set up more, as opposed to when these kind of hotel night, king nights would happen, and that would be mainly at night. And so he recalled just that he would also go to the sex stores and he would get items too, like adult outfits and shoes and high heels. We saw another exhibit photo of the boxes of Astroglide that he would either purchase on the company card or he would get cash from security. And then he also said that he would help clean up these king nights afterwards, where there were lots of sheets and towels and oils everywhere. He said anything that they brought that they would bring back with them. And then again, that he would kind of help as far as just the recovery, as far as bringing the people who would even do the IV drips at the end. And he said that these IV drips were specifically because the guests, as well as the guests and Mr. Combs, would need them to kind of be put to sleep afterwards. So it was kind of interesting as far as his role, because I think before the defense was trying to say that maybe some of these assistants didn't know what was really going on during these hotel nights, but according to or king nights too, but according to Jonathan, it seemed like I think a lot of people were in the know of what was happening in this private time.
And if the jury accepts these are episodes of sex trafficking, coerced sexual events, then it goes into racketeering. So you have his staff, you have others who are coordinating and trying to set this up. Sex trafficking, by the way, is one of the underlying crimes of racketeering. So it's really important to get into that. And also, by the way, prostitution, right? Transportation to engage in prostitution is a separate crime. And then also prostitution, I believe, is also one of the other underlying crimes. Now, I know there was a lot of conversation about Jonathan's and Kristina Khorram. Weren't there a series of audio recordings that were played? And what did we learn exactly about these? I mean, why were these sessions actually recorded, and what did you learn about the conversations between Kristina Khorram and Jonathan?
Yeah, well, I have to take a little bit of a step back just to give the full context of why this recording even happened in the first place. And that was that the staffers at Diddy's home saw a sexually explicit video of Jane with another man, but they also noticed that Diddy was in this particular recording too, because this video clip, or this sexually explicit video, was found on an iPad that was used mainly by the staff. And so the videographer, Brandon, showed this video to Jonathan, and Jonathan said that he ended up seeing a portion of this video, again, that being on the staff iPad. He saw that Diddy was in the background. He didn't see who the other man was in the video, that being the other man outside of Diddy, but he just knew that it was a black man and that Jane was also seen in this video too. And so John told Diddy about the video, but he also told Kristina Khorram. However, he told Diddy first. And so he said Diddy's reaction to people kind of knowing about this particular video found on the staff iPad was that Diddy was surprised about this, but then there were no more conversations between Jonathan and Diddy about this sexually explicit video. However, Kristina Khorram told Jonathan, okay, in the future, you just bring this to me and then I'll bring it to PD or Diddy or Sean Combs. And so Jonathan ended up speaking with Kristina Khorram 6 months later after revealing to them that he saw kind of a portion of this sexually explicit video, because Kristina Khorram wanted to reiterate or get Jonathan to reiterate his story, because she got a call about the video from someone outside of their organization. And so Jonathan didn't know he was being recorded around this time, and we did hear the audio recording. It was played in court. It was from January 30th of 2023, and the jury was able to follow along with transcriptions that were shown in front of their little exhibit screens. And so what we did learn about this audio recording is that Kristina Khorram says, I don't know how to bring this up. Bring that Bosu ball over here. You can sit on it so you're not standing. But she says it was brought to my attention last night, and tell me step by step what happened. An outside person brought this information up to me. Did you talk to anybody? And so Jonathan is saying, I didn't talk to anybody about the sexually explicit video. And Kristina Khorram is like, okay, well, were you inside the house when this was being discussed? And Jonathan is like, okay, well, Brandon was there, and he was saying that there was something on this iPad. Kristina Khorram is like, okay, well, who all was in the house? We can check the cameras inside the house. And then Jonathan is saying, okay, I was just trying to save him being Diddy, as far as telling him ahead of time that he saw this sexually explicit video, just so that way if Diddy wanted to delete this video, he could delete this video. And so Jonathan said that he didn't talk to anybody else about this sexually explicit video outside of the conversations that were had between everyone. And so He did say that Brendan wanted to tell Rob about it, but the advice was to just initially delete the video. But then Jonathan said, let's not delete this video in case something were to happen. It's kind of similar to what he had been testifying to even today. And so Diddy initially wanted to launch an investigation into how this particular sexually explicit video got onto the iPad that is mainly used by the staff. But Jonathan believed that the video was recorded on the iPad. And then Kristina Khorram asked if Brandon might have told other people. John said Brandon was freaking out about it, kind of insinuating that he didn't tell other people because he was so nervous about it. And Kristina Khorram is like, okay, well, was anyone else there? Were the housekeepers there? Was the chef there? And one thing Jonathan did admit while on the stand is that he didn't relay to Kristina Khorram that Chef Kaye was actually inside the theater when this was being talked about. He didn't tell Kristina Khorram this because he said he didn't want to make it this big thing. And so he said that no follow-up conversations were had with Kristina Khorram about the sexually explicit video that the staffers saw. But Fahim, who is Diddy's driver and security guard, brought it up to him. And then Jonathan said that he told the exact same story that he testified to. And even that was recorded on by Kristina Khorram. He relayed that same information to Fahim, too.
Yeah, their knowledge of whatever was going on with Jane is really important, and how they managed that information is very important. Now, he also testified about drugs and money. So if we're talking about a criminal enterprise and we're talking about sex trafficking, and by the way, prosecutors allege that Combs used drugs to keep victims compliant, but drug trafficking is also one of the underlying crimes of this alleged racketeering criminal enterprise. What did he say? What did he testify to about drugs and money?
Yeah, well, he testified a lot to both drugs and money. And we saw an exhibit photo because, again, have to emphasize that we're finally able to see these exhibit photos once again. And that was of Diddy's Gucci pouch, which carried both drugs and carried money. And so as far as the drugs that would normally be inside this particular pouch, it included things like Adderall and ketamine, Molly and cocaine, and said that he was the one, he being Jonathan, had to make sure that Diddy's Gucci pouch was inside Diddy's backpack for these king nights or hotel nights, essentially these freak-offs. And so then we see text exhibits from Jonathan and Rob, who is another staffer, from July 31st of 2022, where Rob is saying, yo, will you locate his Gucci pouch and his backpack? Jonathan responds, yes, I zipped it up, no residue, and I didn't steal one Addy. And that Addy is an address, it's Adderall. And then we see another text message from October 10th of 2022, where Jonathan is saying, hi, I just found items in the Balenciaga pouch that should be in the Gucci pouch. And then Joey, who's also another staffer, responds with this confused face emoji. And then Jonathan is talking about how he means cocaine as far as the residue is concerned. And then Joey says, okay, well, he probably needs it at PT, that being physical therapy. And I think it was just a joke between Joey and Jonathan. And so as far as just other drugs that Jonathan purchased on behalf of Diddy, he said that Diddy or even other assistants would ask Jonathan to purchase or grab drugs for Sean Combs, such as Xanax that he bought, cocaine that he bought, and then Molly that he also purchased for Diddy. And he said that he would get them from presumably drug dealers that were named Baby Girl and another one named Guido, who Jane had even recalled when she was testifying too. And so as far as where he got the cash from, he said he normally got it from Diddy Security. So then we see text messages between Jonathan and Fahim. Again, Fahim is one of Diddy's security guards, from February 15th of 2024. So just last year, where Jonathan says, hi, Fa, just had Dontre pull out $1,200. $700 went to Guido. I'm about to go to the store and buy food with the remaining $500. Then we see receipts that were sent to Fahim, I guess, for reimbursement of this money, or just to prove that he actually purchased what he said he was going to be purchasing with that money that was given to him. And then Jonathan, in another text message to Fahim, says, hi, can you pull $2,100 for a guy coming tonight, plus a little more than $1,500 in cash? And so then we just kind of see more text exhibits too, just as far as him procuring cash that even involved kind of hotel nights. So then we see text messages from Jonathan to Fahim, and he's kind of in a group chat where he's saying, Fa, he's asking you to bring cash. Is it at the house? Let me know. And then Fahim responds, Robin never gave us the cash. And then Jonathan said, hi, Fa, putting PD on this text with us. Need $3,500 for gas. Fahim responds copy, and then Jonathan says, can you leave it in an envelope? And then he ended up testifying he doesn't know exactly what had happened to that money that was in the envelope. And so we saw kind of a great deal of text messages that show just kind of how the kind of chain of events would occur whenever Jonathan needed money to give to either Diddy for to purchase drugs, or it would either be given to them for hotel nights or king nights, or to the guests, because when he's talking about guests, he's talking about the women that were in these hotel nights / king nights over either in hotels or at places like Diddy's residence or Jane's home too.
By the way, what was this about that he had some sort of FaceTime call with Sean Combs?
Yeah, so it related back to what had happened on June 18th and 19th of 2024, and we know that to be the incident involving Jane and just the physical assault that she had testified to when she was testifying. So as you may recall, when Jane was testifying, she said that Jonathan was called during this particular night, and so Jonathan kind of gave his answer as to what his role was on that night, where he said that he brought Diddy over to Jane's house initially, and that a few hours later he got a FaceTime call from Diddy, and as far as Diddy's demeanor was, Diddy was angry and seemed annoyed on this particular FaceTime call. So then the prosecution was like, okay, well, did you see Jane? Did you see her face? What was kind of her reaction to what was going on? And Jonathan said that Jane was turned away from the camera. And so Diddy had FaceTime Jonathan to confirm whether or not another woman was on this trip. Because if you remember from Jane's testimony, kind of the start of their argument was whether or not another woman that Jane was kind of jealous of was on this family trip with Diddy just days prior to him coming over to her house. And so Jonathan said that it seemed like Diddy and Jane were arguing, and that Jonathan told Diddy that there wasn't another woman on the trip. And so he also said that then the FaceTime call ended, but then Jonathan told Kristina Khorram and Fahim that Diddy and the guests were arguing. And so we saw text exhibits from June 18th of 2024 when this incident happened, where Kristina Khorram is saying, heads up, PD going to guest house tonight. And then that following kind of early in those morning hours on June 19th, Jonathan says, me and PD en route to location, heads up, him and guests are fighting. I'm about to go pick him up. Just the normal, her being jealous of other women and yelling at him. And so that's where another message from Jonathan, where he says, just heard from him being PD or Diddy. He said he's not going to, he said not to come at all. Everything's all good. And then later we see a message where Kristina Khorram is saying, hi, can someone go pick up PD ASAP? Jonathan liked that message, and then later brought Diddy back home.
Why did he stop working for Sean Combs? Was it because Combs got arrested?
No, surprisingly, he had very nice things to say about Sean Combs while he was on the witness stand, but he did say the arrest kind of sort of played a little bit of a role as far as why he left, because a lot of things were just up in the air around this time period. And so he said that he wanted to avoid a situation like this, and I think he meant the criminal trial and possibly him having to testify, which is something that he ended up doing. But in the final question that the prosecution asked Jonathan Perez was like, so what are your feelings currently about Diddy? And he says, well, I feel great about him even to this day, even as he's sitting as a defendant on his trial. And at first I was kind of like, why is the prosecution asking a question they may not like the answer to and that type of thing? But then I also kind of thought about it this way. Maybe they want to kind of convey to the jury that even though this is a witness, that is a government witness, that they're not trying to sway his answers in any type of way, especially because he had already gotten an immunity order. And so I think it kind of goes both ways as far as maybe why the government asked that particular question. But as far as Jonathan is concerned, like a lot of other witnesses are concerned, that he had nothing but great things to say about Sean Combs, even to this day.
It arguably makes him more credible, right? It doesn't look like he's got a vendetta and he's got a crusade against Sean Combs. They're using his testimony, not to, be combative. They're using his testimony to help fill in the pieces of sex trafficking and prostitution and racketeering in different ways. Having said that, he also was subject to cross-examination by the defense. So what happened when they had a turn to question him?
Well, I will say you can kind of tell when the defense team likes a particular witness because they're not very aggressive, I will say, in their cross-examination. And it probably helped that Jonathan said that he has nothing but great feelings about Diddy even to this day. And so the cross-exam was conducted by Brian Steele. And so with Brian Steele, I was kind of like, okay, is he going to get aggressive? But he was pretty just kind of above board with this, as he normally is, right? But he wasn't aggressive like he was kind of with Mia while she was testifying. But as far as just the cross-examination is concerned, they really kind of brought it back to the last thing he said under direct examination or direct testimony, where Jonathan said that he still respects Mr. Combs even to this day, that Diddy had motivated him and inspired him. And then they kind of go back to October 26th of 2023 because the defense was saying that was a particular day where Jonathan saw that Diddy was upset, he was crying, something had happened on that day. But Jonathan was saying he doesn't necessarily remember, but he said he got his memory refreshed after a bunch of text messages were shown to him, but just that he remembered Diddy just being upset around this time frame. Then they kind of get into the search that happened by HSI of Diddy's homes in Miami and Los Angeles, where the defense was pointing out that Jonathan had access to the bedroom and to the bathroom and to the closet. And then I think they were kind of trickling in Andre Lamont and what he had testified to just a little bit earlier before Jonathan Perez, as far as asking Jonathan questions like, did you see firearms in any places outside of the security room where that security had it? And so Jonathan said that he didn't see firearms in Diddy's bedroom and bathroom, places he had access to. He only saw firearms with security. And then Jonathan said that he worked for other celebrities too who also had security too, and that there was just a lot of wealth in the house, kind of making the point that there's reasons that there was kind of a lot of weaponry on the property. And so the defense was also pointing out that even after these raids had happened, that Jonathan still continued to work for Diddy. And so then they kind of get into Jane a little bit, how Jane and Jonathan were nice to one another, and that the defense was kind of bringing in that Jane even wanted to go as far as marry Sean Combs too. And so as far as when they kind of talked about the King Nights, I think the defense was really kind of pointing out that this was his personal time. And that's something that the defense has really been also honing in on, is that these were consensual things between adults that happened privately and that were personal things and that they had nothing to do with his business. And so Jonathan says that he does also refer to these King Nights, hotel nights, as Diddy's personal time and that it wasn't work related. And so as far as just whether or not that Jonathan was setting up these hotels and getting these drugs, and then the defense is kind of like, okay, we know it's maybe not the best decision to be purchasing drugs or anything like that, but he says you weren't getting paid to set up these hotel nights and get these drugs. And Jonathan responded, yes, and you did it because you're a good person. And Jonathan is saying, well, I guess so. And then the defense says that Jonathan would even go as far as helping Jane get outfits, because that also was kind of a personal matter, and because him and Jane were very kind of nice and chummy in a way to one another, that this was just kind of a personal thing. And that the defense was also pointing out that as far as cleaning up the hotels afterwards, it wasn't because they were doing it to kind of hide or conceal evidence or things that were non-consensual, any of that. It was because that they just didn't want to burden the hotel staffers and have more mess on the hotel staffers' hands. And so then as far as just Jane is concerned and just her willingness to be at these King Nights or hotel nights, the defense was saying that Jane didn't appear hesitant, and Jonathan said that's true, and that Jane didn't appear unhappy after these King Nights, and Jonathan said that's true. And so even as far as just the incident with Kristina Khorram and the audio recording and just the video, sexually explicit video of Jane on this iPad, the defense says that Kristina Khorram was actually questioning Jonathan about this because this video was a personal matter and that it was on the staff iPad, and that, again, he didn't want to be kind of embarrassed that his staffers were seeing this personal, intimate video of him with him in the background of this video, and then Jane's in that video, that type of thing. And so the defense was really kind of like, okay, well, how much of your time on the job was really spent setting up these hotel nights or King Nights? And then Jonathan said that these personal matters were just kind of 1% of his entire role as an assistant, whereas all the other stuff was 99% of the time, and that The defense was pointing out that, Diddy's not very proficient with technology. I think kind of also playing into what had happened just with the whole video recording found on the staff iPad. And that was a moment where Diddy kind of chuckled and he laughed at the defense table. And even as far as Diddy's kind of relationship, that being, the professional friendship relationship that he had with Kristina Khorram, that Diddy and Kristina Khorram were particularly close, that it wasn't a sexual relationship or anything like that. The two were pretty much like best friends, and that then the defense was asking about Jane and whether or not she's like a confident, strong woman, because when Jane was testifying, she was talking about how she didn't leave after the incident that happened on June of 2024. And so then they really kind of ended their cross-examination really just talking about just the money. And it was really just the money as far as just mixing business money and personal money, and that referred to just the cash. And so Jonathan said he wasn't sure if Diddy was mixing the business and personal money for cash for King nights, or if he was paying off the credit cards with the business money that he was using for just these personal matters. And so Jonathan said that other celebrity assistants also get personal items for their boss, and he said that it's not a cover-up for the hotel booking to be in his name, because the jury saw a specific exhibit where the hotel booking name was under Jonathan's name, and then Jonathan texted Diddy the room number, and they were saying, okay, well, is it possible that this hotel was put under your name? Because if the staffers were to see it was booked under Sean Combs' name, then there might be, paparazzi or crazy fans, and it's just more for privacy reasons, and something similar to what a lot of celebrities have been reported to do too. And so then the defense is really kind of talking about how even Jane kind of helped coordinate these hotel nights, and that Jane and Jonathan would text about Jonathan getting Jane things like avocado toast and just orange juice, and that Jonathan would also text Jane about picking up things that were like lingerie and just like kind of sexy outfits and that type of stuff. And so that was really kind of the basis of their cross-examination, to the point there were times, honestly, Jesse, at the end, I was kind of like, why did the government call him as a witness? And then it kind of, because of just the way the cross-examination went at times. And so I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are just on it.
Look, it's another gray area. It's the question was Sean Combs using his business resources, his staff, to facilitate and cover up crimes. If the jury accepts it, that goes to racketeering. If they don't, it doesn't. There needs to be that element there. There needs to be that common agreement. There needs to be this association of people. The idea that he wasn't technologically proficient, they're basically saying, hey, he wasn't intending to take these videos or use them as blackmail against purported victims. The idea that Jane is a strong, independent woman who was a willing participant in all of this. I mean, Jane in and of herself is kind of a witness you question whether it supports sex trafficking, because it's not the classic example of a sex trafficker and victim relationship, although she did testify in detail, particularly through her text messages, that she was reluctant and didn't want to engage in these hotel nights with men. Talked about how exhausted she was, sick she was. There was allegations of physical violence. And, it becomes a very difficult battle for the jury. What are they going to do when they ultimately have to deliberate? I've said it before, I'll say it again. I think this deliberation process is going to take quite some time to weigh the credibility of a Cassie and a Mia and a Jane and a Brianna Bungolan. It's tough. It's really, really tough. And there's this gray area about it. It's a unique prosecution. Having said it, the prosecution has put forward a lot of evidence that maybe checks boxes, even for racketeering, particularly where for the racketeering charge, you have to prove a number of you have to prove at least two of the underlying crimes. So whether it is kidnapping or forced labor or bribery or arson or sex trafficking, it's a very, very voluminous case, and it's going to be up to both the prosecution and the defense to be very clear about what the role is for the jury and what the elements are. Now, after he leaves the stand, you would think that was the end of the day. But the judge and the prosecution and the defense had all of these administrative things to work through about who's going to testify next, what evidence is going to come in. Now, I didn't see anything to indicate that Kristina Khorram is going to take the stand. I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that. I'm still shocked that she wouldn't take the stand since she's come up so much in testimony. But she did come up a lot in this, after the jury was dismissed, she did come up a lot in this discussion between the judge and the attorneys, right? Did we get a sense of what evidence from her or regarding her is going to come in? I also understand Gina, alleged victim number 3, came up too. And Brendan Paul, the guy who got arrested last year back at the airport, this assistant of Sean Combs, these 3 people came up a lot, and we might have a sense of what the future of this prosecution is going to look like.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it was after this whole discussion about the jury or the juror, whether or not this particular juror is going to be dismissed. But it seems like from the government standpoint, they're ready to put on at least one of their summary witnesses on Monday. And so we're learning possibly what some of these summary exhibits might really contain. And so there were particular exhibits that the defense objected to about videos and images. And these were exhibits being screenshots from Kristina Khorram. And so the defense was saying, we understand the probative value for the government, but taking these photos and screenshots out of the summary, it's kind of a 403, it's prejudicial, and that Kristina Khorram took these screenshots because she was directed to by her counsel, whereas the government's saying there is high probative value when it comes to these particular screenshot messages, especially when it comes to Kristina Khorram's knowledge, especially involving her Diddy's relationship with Jane. And so the government said that Kristina Khorram continued to facilitate hotel nights even after 2023, because the defense was saying, okay, well, Jane facilitated, and she testified that she facilitated the next hotel nights at the Four Seasons. And when they would do hotel nights at Diddy's home, that it was kind of Jane doing this, whereas opposed to the government saying, okay, well, these hotel nights were facilitated by Kristina Khorram also in June, because there was what had happened over at Jane's house on June 18th of 2024, where she was kind of instructing Jonathan to drop Diddy off, pick him up, that they knew that this was going to be a hotel night, and they consider that kind of to be helping to facilitate that particular matter. And so the judge ended up overruling the defense's objection, so the jury will see these screenshots taken from Kristina Khorram. Now, as far as just Gina is concerned, I kind of wasn't fully clear on whether or not these were text messages or notes that were either taken from Gina or involving Gina or surrounding Gina, but Gina was brought up during this particular argument by the defense, where they were saying, the government abandoned the theory that Gina was a sex trafficking victim, because what we've learned throughout this trial is that alleged victim number 3 was actually Gina, and she's been somebody that's been talked about in Jane's testimony, all the way going back to Cassie's testimony, sprinkled in with other witnesses here and there. I think even one assistant, that being George Kaplan, testified that he saw Diddy being physically violent with Gina during his time working with him. But as far as the defense is saying, that there was no evidence that Gina was a sex trafficking victim, and that this is a 404 issue, and that the government wants to use, the government wants to use these messages, so we do know they are messages, as kind of 404 bad acts type of evidence. And so the government is saying, well, the defendant was aware that law enforcement might get involved during the Cassie fight at the Intercontinental Hotel, and that Gina ended up becoming kind of a big part of the case. And so the judge ended up siding with the defense in this matter about this evidence being inadmissible. And so the jury won't see this particular piece of evidence. But I don't believe, honestly, Jesse, it'll be the last time we hear about Gina before the prosecution rests their case. Now, as far as your last point, and I think this to me, at least is the biggest, is that we learned that Brendan Paul is going to be testifying next week. And I think that is I personally think it's possibly, okay, we'll really see kind of what all happened during Brendan Paul's time. Because to your point, Jesse, and this is something that we've covered even at Law&Crime, is Brendan Paul's arrest, because he allegedly was carrying drugs on behalf of Diddy or for Diddy, and he ended up being arrested around this time frame. And so it'll be interesting to see Brendan Paul take the stand and whether or not he possibly also got an immunity order in order to testify as a government witness in this case.
If anybody thought that this case was going to slow down, it certainly will not. We still have a lot more, and who knows what the defense is going to do and who they're going to call. But you know who's going to be there for every minute of it? Elizabeth Millner. Elizabeth, thank you so much. Great seeing you. Rest up. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, you too, Jesse.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.